So we recently published a report called The Loss of Control Playbook, Degrees, Dynamics, and Preparedness. And in this video, we're going to talk about chapter 3 of the report, which looks at ways in which loss of control might materialize in the future. So we start chapter 3 by introducing this concept of a state of vulnerability. And maybe you could start us off by just explaining what we mean by that.
Yeah, so in this chapter, we're talking about potential futures and always under the assumption that AI capabilities will continue to increase as they have been doing. So we define a state of vulnerability as a situation in which a future AI system has acquired or is able to acquire sufficient access to resources, affordances, and permissions, and is sufficiently capable of exploiting those resources to cause loss of control. So, in other words, it's a state in which loss of control is one step away from occurring. All of the components for it to happen are already there, which means that the AI could, in theory, cause a catastrophic outcome.
And then in the paper, we also give some reasons why we think we might actually end up in this state of vulnerability.
Yeah, so we think there's sort of two main pathways to reaching a state of vulnerability to loss of control. One is sort of human directed and one is sort of AI directed. So on the human pathway, assuming that AI capabilities will continue to increase, we think that it's likely that humans will continue to integrate AI into more and more high stakes deployment contexts, giving them more and more autonomy. And this is already sort of happening. We see the contracts with the Department of War, we see ChatGPT for health, Anthropic is releasing a model for health related topics. And this happens for a number of reasons. Economic incentives, obviously, it moves technology forwards, but also because of sort of pressure from geopolitical rivals. On the other hand, we might underestimate how risky AI systems actually are when we deploy them. So we might have incorrect threat models about, this AI system can't actually cause that much harm for whatever reason, and then we deploy it and realize that we were mistaken. And then for the sort of AI-directed pathway to a state of vulnerability, we think it's plausible that AI systems might eventually be advanced enough to circumvent controls placed upon them. So this might be akin to a zero-day vulnerability found by a hacker, so that's able to circumvent the controls you placed around your system that you don't know about in a way you don't know about yet and didn't anticipate, and that AI systems would be able to do the same for the controls we place around them, meaning we're no longer safe, basically.
And then we have this idea in the report that once we're in a state of vulnerability, there's some kind of trigger that needs to happen in order for a loss of control outcome to occur.
Yeah, so when everything else is in place, when sort of all of the components have been arranged, what actually causes loss of control, right? So we conceptualize that trigger to be malfunction. So that malfunction could be either sort of a pure, more software malfunction or misalignment. And so misalignment is when an AI system acts in a way that the human didn't intend for it to act, or pursues some goal that the humans didn't want it to do, or in some way that the humans didn't intend. So one example of that would be reward hacking. So for example, I think OpenAI had this instance where they asked the AI to sort of go on a boat race, a virtual boat race, and they expected the AI to get points by reaching the finish line in the most fastest time. And instead, the AI ended up standing next to a box and breaking it continuously because that was the most efficient way to get points, but it obviously wasn't what they intended. And that's just one example, very minor example of reward hacking, which can be obviously a lot more severe in real life circumstances. And then the other trigger or like the other component would be like malfunction, just a pure software malfunction, basically. So, for example, the AI might think that the air in a vent is safe and clean for whatever reason, but vents the air to the outside world, but it was actually contaminated. So that could also have severe consequences, but it's a different kind of malfunction. So this puts us in a pretty difficult position because alignment is an open scientific problem, and it's probably very difficult to completely exclude the other type of malfunction. And so we are still vulnerable, basically.
So the idea here is that if we're in a state of vulnerability, then loss of control is very likely to happen eventually, at least.
Yeah, so we think there's sort of two worlds. One where we're in a state of vulnerability and loss of control doesn't happen, and one where it does. And we basically think it's quite unlikely for us to be in the world where it doesn't happen because of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, misalignment and malfunction being the triggers for loss of control, and it being quite hard to exclude pure malfunctions. Everything malfunctions once in a while, even very reliable systems. And on the other hand, solving misalignment seems to be quite a difficult problem. How do we ensure that the AI functions as we want in every single case forever? And even if this were the case, we would also have to prove that this is the case in order for us to feel that we don't need to take additional action. So we think it's quite likely that we are in the other state wherein loss of control will eventually happen given that we reach a state of vulnerability, unless we take additional measures to mitigate that risk.
So the framing here is something like, for risk management purposes, we want to assume that loss of control is going to happen, and therefore we want to continuously be taking steps to try and prevent this. And as part of that, we list some concrete steps, mitigation measures, interventions that we can take to try and stack the odds in our favor here.
Yeah, so one obvious thing would be not to deploy AI systems into high stakes deployment contexts in the first place in a way that pose catastrophic risks. So, for example, the AI in control of nuclear weapons. Maybe we want to avoid that at all costs in any case. But even as the pressure sort of increases, there's not nothing we can do. We can still deploy AI models in various situations while still being moderately safe. And that can mean governance interventions or technical interventions. So, for example, it can mean constructing good threat models in order to figure out where are we vulnerable. It can mean usage policies, so who can use the AI in what circumstances. And it can mean emergency response plans, wherein if the worst happens, how do we respond? How do we make sure that the events don't sort of cascade out of control? And then on the other hand, for technical interventions, we can do pre-deployment testing in accordance to our threat models. We can use control measures to limit the AI's actions once it's actually deployed, and we can monitor it to ensure that all of these things are actually working correctly. But in the end, how we prevent loss of control from happening is sort of an open problem, and there's likely no silver bullet intervention. It'll likely be some sort of defense in depth approach that continuously learns from new capabilities, incidents happening, hopefully minor incidents happening, and we'll have to work at that in order to prevent loss of control in the long run.
Perfect. I think we'll finish up there for the video. Thank you for watching. Again, if you're interested in reading more about the paper, you can go to our website, apolloresearch.ai, and you can read the paper in full. Also on the website is all of our other work as well.